Okay, we are on page 55, and that's somebody coming in just in time, and that's Emmanuel. Yes, there you go. It is Emmanuel. I guessed right. Okay. Do you have your book? You gotta bring your textbooks. Okay, now we're looking at page 55, and then we're going to go back to page 54 and then back to 53. So 55, we're going to start off. Now, I want to encourage you in this kind of study. The kind of thinking that we have to do in order to do this kind of study really develops your ability to look at things logically. That's going to help you out in life. Okay, so it's kind of like, I remember sometimes people will ask me, okay, how I know to do stuff. Like, for instance, I did this ceiling out in the auditorium. I had some help to do it, but I laid that all out and made it all joined together. And then I built the office upstairs here. I built the steps over there. I did the work on the plumbing going into the bathroom, in the bathrooms, and then I've done electrical work. And sometimes people say, well, how do you know these things? Well, you know, I had the blessing that my father was a builder and he taught me a lot of things. But also, each different kind of work, whether it's plumbing with water, wires with electricity, or building the office with wood, there's principles that apply in each case that you use from one building trade to the next. As you're using the logic that's presented here, you're going to use that same logic elsewhere. In fact, I think I want to try to encourage Isaac to do some writing also. We'll have to talk to you about that, because you're developing your interpretational skills, aren't you? And because you're thinking, well, how do I figure this out? It becomes a puzzle. As you do that kind of writing, that kind of figuring out those puzzles is better than any video game. Okay, because you're really thinking, I'm in a video game, you're just sort of reacting to the same things. It's the same thing over and over and over again. They just change the graphics, really. Okay, but this kind of thinking, it presents a lot more puzzles. I used to play some video games. There's nothing wrong with some video games. I'm talking as a preacher. I enjoyed Pac-Man, and there were some other video games. They weren't so developed back then. But what interested me more was, computer science. And so when I started programming, making programs for the church management software and other programs that I would do, I liked programming a lot more than I liked video games. And it was like, I lost all interest in the video games. And I wasn't really that into the video games. It's not like, one of those addictions or anything like that. They were a little bit fun, but programming was a lot more fun. Doing this writing and figuring these things out is a lot better. As you get older, they want older people to keep their minds active, and so they'll play Sudoku, or they'll things that exercise the mind, things like that. And so that's an interesting exercise. But writing and reading is way more a blessing. In fact, when you just look at the book, okay, this was the product of sitting down and writing on all the things that I knew about theology. And so that's so this kind of study is going to be very helpful to you. And I'm going to show you a way today, when I talk about the allegorical method. I said, okay, and I got to get some kind of real example, because whenever you see some real examples of things, it comes alive to you even more. And so I'm gonna be looking at page 55 just a little bit because we went over everything there. The grammatical historical method of interpretation, and we talked about how it's very important to have it's very important to use rules to be able to let me see. It's very important to be able to use those rules to interpret things. If you were doing, and as I said, if you end up pursuing real estate for real and you got to deal with contracts, those contracts spell things out very carefully, and they have specific meanings, and you can't just say, well, this means that he should give me twice the money that I asked for. Okay, no, it says here I'm only supposed to give you this much money. Okay, no, so the contracts mean stuff. And this is, an effect of what I'm talking about how this is going to affect your understanding and your intelligence. As you start to interpret things and as you start to analyze things, that's going to make you more valuable as an employee. Okay, if you can read instructions and get them taken care of, there's stories that are told about people who are hiring somebody, and they have these applications. And in fact, I remember specifically, my wife was in this kind of a situation, and she's really smart. I love her an awful lot. She really is very smart. But when she was in high school, she went to get a job. It was in the shoe department at a store. And she handed her application in. She got hired. And the guy who was doing the hiring pointed out she was the only one who filled out the application properly. She followed the instructions. And if you can't interpret and understand the instructions, you're no good to an employer. So interpretation is a very important skill. It reminds me of a story about how a teacher, was trying to talk to the students about how to follow instructions, and they had a test, and the first instruction was read the entire test completely. You've heard this story? It did. They're still using it. And at the end it says, don't fill out it. You didn't listen? Okay. Now, yeah. So you get to the end, it says, don't fill anything out, skip the whole test. So yeah, that's very, very important then. I'm so glad they gave you that. I'm so glad they're still using that. Okay. So, and this is God's word. Read the instructions. Read all the instructions. But you've got to have rules to do it. Now, here is, I just put this on the board. We talked about grammar. And grammatical rules are very important. You really should have more time that you think about the grammar of stuff that you're reading. And you should be able to break it down. When you're doing Bible study, it's absolutely important. Okay, so here's a sentence on the screen there. John hit Bill. He cried out in pain. Who cried out in pain? Who's he referring to? Huh? Could be John. He hit Bill, but he really hurt his hand when he did. Ow! Yeah, we don't know. Okay, that's why when you write things, okay, you have to pick up on things like that. And when you're in the process of writing for school, it's possible to make mistakes like this. And the teacher will say, you have the pronoun he. Who is the antecedent to he? Antecedent means the thing that goes before, that refers to he. Ante meaning before. Sedere is the Latin for to go. Okay, you have precede, you're going to go before. Proceed, you're going to go after. Succeed, okay, yeah. Ancestors, the word ancestor, I bet you it would be related to the word sedere. Yeah, I'll bet you. I don't know for sure, but I can hear it in there. Okay, the ancient one who went before you. Okay, so John hit Bill. We don't know who the antecedent is. It could be John or Bill. Grammar is important. When you're reading in the scriptures, there are places where you can't quite tell who's speaking. Is it the prophet or is it God speaking? And you're going to do some grammatical thinking, and then you're going to use some other things to try to figure it out. But it's all like little puzzles to figure it out. Okay, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. How would I write it? John hit Bill, and I would say, and then John cried out in pain. Okay, I want to use disambiguation. Okay, do you know what ambiguity means? Ambi meaning sort of like both. Okay, if I'm ambidextrous, I can use both hands. Okay, well, if you have ambiguation, that means you can't tell who it's referring to. So you want to use disambiguation. You want to undo the thing there. So yeah, so you would actually have to spell that out. I have to do that when I'm preparing a sermon. Okay, I come across this problem and I'm correcting my writing so I can, make sure people can tell which thing I'm referring to. Okay, so that's the significance of the grammatical method, and we got that when we looked especially at page 55. Okay, now I'm going to take another passage here, Genesis 39, verses 21 to 23. Okay, and this is pretty good. Now, this is where we're going to get into the allegorical method. So, Emmanuel, go ahead and read that out loud for us. Yeah. Showed. Okay, so the keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand. Who is his hand referring to? See, this is one of those things where you got to think of what's the antecedent. It's Joseph. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And so a clue here would be in verse 22 where it says committed to Joseph's hand, and then it refers to anything that was under his hand. So that would be the clue as to who the antecedent was. So now you got to picture this. Do you remember the story of Joseph very much at all? Okay. So the story goes that Jacob's sons, out of Jacob came the 12 tribes of Israel. And so he had 12 sons. And Joseph was one of the sons. He was the favorite son because he was from the wife that Jacob really loved. He was Rachel's son. And so he gave him a coat with many colors, which was a nice, rich coat. Not in, yeah, he did, but it's not the slavery of the Jews that you're thinking of later on under Pharaoh. Okay, that comes about 400 years later. Okay, so, uh, oh no, yeah, comes about 400 years later. So Joseph was the good son. The other ones were connivers. Could be jerks at times, and so Joseph would report on them. Well, the brothers they conspired and they took Joseph's coat, covered it with some blood, took it to their father, and said, "Oh, Joseph was killed by a wild animal." When in reality, what they did was they sold Joseph to a slaver coming from the east, and he was then taken down into Egypt, and he was sold to Potiphar. Potiphar was, like a government official, and Joseph was really good in the house. He was maintaining his integrity, but Potiphar's wife had it in for him. She kept trying to seduce him. He kept resisting. Look, I'm in charge of all your husband's house, and what am I going? I can't do this. This is bad. You can't do this. Well, she grabs a hold of his coat. He runs out. The coat drops off. She accuses him of trying to take advantage of her, and all the people look at his coat and like, oh yeah, okay. So I don't think Potiphar necessarily believed her, by the way, but that would be another teaching moment. So Joseph gets thrown into a prison, not a regular prison. It's more like a political prison that he gets thrown into. So it's not like a dungeon kind of thing. But Joseph, and this is where the story comes in, while he's in the prison, he maintains his integrity. He doesn't just say, oh, okay, I'm going to have, this is unfair, I'm just going to do whatever I want. He's going to do things honestly. So the keeper of the prison trusted him. Okay, so that's what this is saying here. Okay, and so we're going to now use interpretation. The allegorical method is the thing that we're going to look at. On page 54, it refers to the allegorical method, and in the first bullet point there, it has lack of objectivity. Allegory is looking for hidden, symbolic, or spiritual meanings behind the literal text. Literal means the actual text. Okay, so we got the meaning of the text, didn't we? Joseph should maintain his integrity. Bam. Was that hard? No, that was really kind of obvious. But somebody with the allegorical method says, there's something behind this. There's a deeper meaning, and let me see if I can see what it means. And it does undermining of the literal method. Okay, or undermining. It cuts it short. Okay, and you don't get the literal thing. It has erosion of scriptural authority. It says, ignore the Bible. I'm going to do with it whatever I want to. And it can bring in doctrinal error. And this method was historically misused. So let's look at the allegorical way of treating this. We're going to find the deeper meaning. Now, when people do that, if preachers do that, they're really trying to, I think, I don't know if they mean this or not. I think maybe they do. They try to make themselves look smart, like, I see something that you don't see. Okay? The Apostle Peter talked about how things were not of private interpretation, meaning that you don't have your own little thing that you see, okay? No, it's going to be obvious to everybody. If anybody looked at our passage, they would say, oh yeah, I get it. Okay, I understand exactly what it means. But the guy with the allegorical methods, no, let's look at it deeper. So, he says that Joseph represents the faithful believer living under unjust earthly conditions. That's pretty true, isn't it? Okay, Joseph, he was faithful, and he was in an unjust situation. The prison represents adverse circumstances. Actually, the prison represents the prison. Okay? but it could mean adverse or uncomfortable circumstances. Okay. The keeper of the prison represents delegated earthly authority. God's presence represents divine favor that transcends or goes beyond the circumstances. Now that's not unreasonable, is it, to suggest that? Well, okay. But it's not the actual statement that's being made. This saying that this represents this and that represents that is not so bad if it's very close to what was actually happening. So the reading, the interpretation that they would get out of this is even when the believer is unjustly confined by circumstances beyond his control, yeah, okay. So if you're a believer and you're facing unjust circumstances, well, what you're doing is you're applying the lesson of Joseph. You're saying, what can I learn from Joseph? And you say, I'm in unjust circumstances. God's presence causes faithfulness to flourish. If you stay faithful, you too will flourish. Maybe. Maybe not. Depends on how unjust the situation is. Though externally restrained, the believer, you're restrained externally. He was restrained by the prison. The believer may still be entrusted with responsibility, influence, and usefulness. Oh, that was true of Joseph. Maybe that could be true for you too. God's blessing does not remove hardship. You might have to stay in the hardship, but it redefines it as a sphere of service. So if you're in an unjust situation and you're faithful, you might get stuck in that unjust situation, but you can be used by God anyhow. And Joseph was used in the prison by God. Okay? He helped a couple of other prisoners out later on with their dreams and helped to explain things. And this brought him to Pharaoh's attention. And he was called upon to interpret Pharaoh's dream. Okay, so this is not so bad, this interpretation. I'm looking for the meaning behind it. What can I get out of it? Oh, my unjust circumstances. I might not be in prison, but maybe I'm in another problem area. Maybe I'm stuck in a class where the teacher's not good, and I wish I had this other teacher who was teaching history because they're a much better teacher. Why am I stuck in this class? Okay. Well, maybe it's not so unjust, but maybe God has you in that class for a purpose. And that's Jonathan coming in. Okay. Now we're going to look at a different allegorical interpretation. We're over here. Okay. Quick, take a seat. I'm in the middle of allegory, looking for the meaning behind something. But if you look for the secret meaning that a passage has, you end up possibly overdoing it. So here is a stretch allegorical reading. It's speculative. It's sort of, if you're speculating, you're trying to find reasons. Like, why do you think Jonathan is late? Don't say why. Why do you think he's late? Speculate with me. What do you think he was late? What would you say he was late for? He was sleeping. What do you think he was late for? No, he already said sleeping. You got to say something different. Playing games. I think he was late because he wanted to go to McDonald's first. Okay. Now, were any of us right? Isaac was a little bit. Oh, that bad boy. Okay. But you see what happened? He was wrong. I was wrong. That's speculation, trying to make up reasons, trying to figure it out. We don't need to speculate when we go to the Bible. We want to look for the actual meaning. So, somebody who's using the allegorical method, trying to find the secret meaning behind things, they said Joseph represents Christ. Huh? That's interesting. Does Joseph represent Christ? Huh? what's going to be said will actually make some sense. Joseph represents Christ. The prison represents fallen humanity under bondage. Okay. The prisoners represent sinners. It doesn't. Okay. That's the speculation. That's the problem. Okay. The keeper represents divine justice, temporarily delegating authority. Joseph's administration represents Christ's mediatorial rule even in a fallen world. So they're going to interpret this passage as, though Christ is rejected and confined within the fallen order, God entrusts him with authority over those bound in sin. Now, is that kind of true? That's kind of true. Is it what the passage says? No. Okay. Christ governs even within humanity's prison house, and all spiritual progress made there is ultimately accomplished through him, prospered by God. That all makes sense, and it corresponds to the elements of the story. Okay? Prison, fallen humanity. Joseph, Christ. Keeper of the prison, God's authority. Okay? So it matches up, but it's not in the story. So this, it's coherent, it works, but it's not what the story teaches. Okay, the other application that we made, that's what it teaches. Then comes an outlandish allegorical reading. Okay, this one is whack. This is where people get in trouble with allegory. Okay, so somebody says, well, Joseph represents the subconscious mind. What? Okay, how could somebody just made it up. Actually, I went to ChatGPT and I said, make up 3 illustrations for me. One that's reasonable, the other one that's a stretch, and give me something really stupid. And this is what it came up with. The prison represents societal repression. Like you're repressed by society. How unfair is that? You know, all these prejudices in society. That's repression. The keeper represents institutional power. The prisoners represent suppressed desires. Okay, the prisoners are the prisoners in my mind, all the desires that I have, and I have to hold back my desires. I can't fulfill them. Prosperity represents psychological integration. Okay, can you see that this is really stupid? Okay, now there are actually people who talk like this. They actually say things like this. So their understanding of the passage is Joseph represents the fully awakened inner self. Okay, he's no longer psychologically under bondage. The Lord is not a personal God. Oh, wait a second. Okay, it's a symbol for higher moral awareness. In other words, does Joseph have a higher morality? And that's what it's representing when he says God? The prison represents society's prejudice and bigotry. And the prisoners are outdated laws that must be managed rather than obeyed. As the inner self matures, external authority becomes unnecessary. Oh, I don't need external authority. That's all prejudiced and bigoted anyhow. Since true guidance now comes from within, freedom, therefore, is found not through obedience to God, but by mastering oneself in spite of society's prejudices and doing whatever one truly desires. Can you pick out the worst part of that reading? You know, that could be the worst one is, look at the last line. If I can get rid of society's prejudices, okay, doing whatever one truly desires, uh-oh. Yeah, that's flatly wrong. Okay? But when people are using the allegorical method, and if they get used to doing this and they're trying to read things in, what they're doing is they're reading in their own ideas into the passage rather than what you're supposed to actually get from the passage. So you see what happens with allegorical reasoning? So let's say you move to the state of Maryland, Okay, it's gotta be far away, because if you're within commuting distance, you should come here to church. But you move far away to Maryland, and you're going to pick out a church, and you go to this church that's a liberal church, and you say, well, they look like they have, a good number of people here, and everything looks nice and professional. And then you hear the preacher start talking like this. That is evidence. Get out of that church. Okay. This is what politicians do. In fact, just this morning I was reading how about the police chief of Washington, D.C. Okay, she's had to resign because there's a scandal that she was faking the crime numbers to make everything look better than it was, only there was real problems of crime. And so she said, I'm going to the Bible for this next statement. And she said, F you haters. And I thought, you're getting that from the Bible? Where'd you get that from the Bible? Okay. She read her own thinking into the Bible, and there's nothing like that in the Bible that says that. It talks about haters, maybe. I'm sorry. Love your enemies. There you go. That's what the Bible actually says. So,
I can be listening to less long. I gotta do this.
Okay, go ahead. Okay, so this is where people will read meanings into things. Have you ever seen the movie Fiddler on the Roof? You gotta see Fiddler on the Roof. Okay, it's a classic movie. I'm sorry? It's a classic movie, yes. It explains a lot about a time period. It gives an example of a time period when there was anti-Semitism in Russia, where they were trying to purge the Jews out of Russia. It's a very interesting movie, but the main character, Tevye, he has a problem because he's got several daughters, the three older daughters. They were each going to end up getting married. And in each case, he was, it was going against their Jewish tradition, and it was getting worse and worse and worse. One of the daughters takes a fancy to their tutor. The tutor, he was Jewish, but he was a communist. And he was reading into this lesson that he was teaching all about communism. And it was somebody using this bad allegorical method. The lesson was not about communism. The lesson, I can't remember what the lesson was about. It was a Bible lesson, but he put into it what he wanted. This is why when you're studying theology, when you're looking at the Bible, okay, and this is all part of bibliology, it is very important that we have good methodology for interpreting the Bible. Make sure that's still on.
Oh yeah, I got a question. No, Anne Frank.
Anne Frank?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, basically, while we were reading, they were Jewish family. While we were reading about them, the characters were praying.
Yeah.
Yeah, they mentioned heroic Maccabees. Crow started using that to debunk them.
He can't give it up, can he? Yeah. Maccabees was a historical book, but it was just not Bible.
No, but those people praying. They said blah blah blah. Around the heroic Maccabees.
Yeah.
That like a name.
The heroic, well, the Maccabees were heroes that were fighting against the Romans and the Greeks. Okay. Now there's one other aspect. Go over to page 53. And it's talking about the critical method. Okay. In the critical method, look at the bullet points there. They had a rejection of divine authority. That method undermines the divine inspiration of the Bible, treats it as a human document, and they will deny things just based on theories that they have. They have philosophical biases. They have their. I'm sorry. They're philosophical. They just use their philosophy that they're that they read it into the Bible. Yeah, in a wrong way. Okay, so Genesis 39:21, they'll say, is not a historical account, but it's a later ideological construction designed to legitimize bureaucratic authority within an emerging Israelite administrative class. What? This is not about some ruling class. Okay, Joseph is not a real individual, they might say, but a literary archetype representing the ideal of foreign court official. Okay, so they'll conclude here that the passage teaches that success within oppressive systems comes not from divine intervention. Yes, it does, but from adaptability and usefulness to power structures. So if you're useful to the power structures, that's where your success comes in. Okay, so it's like, well, as long as I just obey the power structures. Well, no, that's not what you should do, because the Bible says elsewhere we should obey God rather than man. Okay, so you see how somebody who's just being critical of this and saying, oh, this is not real history, and they make it say what they want it to say. This is going back to, again, the grammatical historical method on page 55. There are good rules for how we interpret the Bible, and your good old friend there, he doesn't abide by them. Okay, he reads into it what he wants to read into it. He's using his philosophy of what makes sense to him, and he forces the Bible to try to say it when he should really let the Bible say what it says. This is one of the things that people have been blessed as they've come here, because we major on really teaching the Bible. People start to notice that. If you've been in a church where they don't really teach an awful lot, where they just do a lot of emotionalism and things like that, where they try to get you to be all hyped up emotionally, get you all excited about stuff, okay? I want to say, what are you getting excited about? Tell me the wonderful truths that you see in the Bible. Then I'll get excited. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're going to go over to the dispensational overall message of the Bible, progressive revelation, and the dispensational framework. You got to know about dispensationalism. This is something that will really help you. I'm not going to do that right now, but the next time I'm going to show you how you can get the overall message of the Bible when you look how God worked in different ages and how it progresses through time. It'll really aid your understanding as you interpret the Bible.